This is the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. On today's program, we're going to talk once again about the all-important subject about how we can raise our awareness, our intelligence, our perception, so that we can understand what's really going on internally inside our own body, soul, and spirit, and so that we can understand at a very heightened sense what's going on in the world around us, both seen and unseen. Now, what this means is that we have to understand that God has designed us to understand and perceive things, to gain His wisdom, to gain His guidance, to gain His knowledge at a far, far, far greater rate than most of us realize. Why? Because most of us went to public school, or even if we didn't go to public school, most likely we went to a school in which we were programmed, to be blunt. We were indoctrinated, to be even blunter, to turn the dimming switch off on the lights of our brain. In other words, we were taught through the curriculum, the content, the style of education. And think of our God-given brains as like a bright light bulb. Not a fluorescent weird light bulb or something like that, but a bright light bulb that kind of looks like the sun in terms of its color. And that bright light bulb is burning brightly, and we can see where we're going in life, both internally and externally. That's how God created us. But through the educational process, which is an indoctrination process, we were deliberately, scientifically dumbed down so that the dimmer switch was turned on, and we only have all of us are just operating on a glimmer of light. So we really can't see where we're going, both internally and externally. Now, forgetting about the Bible for just a second, and simply looking at what I just said from a scientific point of view, that statement that I just made is fairly obvious to a growing number of psychologists, thinkers, philosophers, people who deal with the mind and awareness and the brain, etc. In fact, ironically, I was driving in the car to LAX yesterday to meet with a filmmaker, and we were talking about producing Trumpocalypse as a feature film. And I found myself doing this with increasing frequency. I would turn on to the local PBS, public broadcasting system network, which basically holds the opposite point of view that I hold in most things. But when you get past that, a lot of the things that they're talking about are things that smart Christians are talking about. And if you got two things. You got areas where you and I would not agree with what they're saying, but you got a lot of areas where you and I would agree potentially with what they're saying. So they had this guy on, I forgot what his name was. He was some kind of motivational speaker, but he wasn't, your typical motivational speaker. He was like a higher level motivational speaker. And he kept using languages and phrases that, that I could have used in one of my teachings on intelligence or whatever. And he alluded to the fact, this is on PBS, and the guy was obviously a liberal, but he alluded to the fact that we are deliberately being dumbed down. And he made this in reference to commercial products, in which he named a number of popular soft drinks. So think of the two biggest selling brand names in colas, and you do the math. And he was mentioning them. And he was saying that, these colas are not good for you nutritionally, et cetera, et cetera. And not only that these companies that he was referring to, he said, pollute the ocean because they throw massive amounts of plastic in the ocean, and which is destroying the ocean ecologically, not in a frivolous sense. I'm talking about killing off all the life and the fish in the ocean, making the ocean completely toxic. And then he made the remark was that people who should be smart, and if they were using, he didn't say God-given, but if they were using their brains, and he implied some kind of divine designer, but it wasn't Jesus. He said if they were using their God-given brains, but he didn't use the word God, that they would know that this stuff is bad for them and that these companies are polluting. And he said something to the effect of, that's why it's so important for these major corporations to dumb down the people so that they'll buy their products and services. Now, he gave a somewhat limited yet accurate description of what's really going on. And, I had to say to myself, because, I get accused of being a conspiracy theorist. That doesn't really go well for the people who accuse me of being a conspiracy theorist. Because if we're in a debate or appearing on a media program or I'm speaking at a conference and stuff, I try to be nice. I really do. But, if somebody is going to accuse me of being a conspiracy theorist, I'm going to, in love, but aggressively challenge them to prove what they just said, which they never can prove what they just said. And so, I don't have some sadistic desire, but they end up being embarrassed. And I try not to embarrass them. I try to be kind, but they end up being embarrassed and leave in defeat. Because I've been doing this for 45 years. They spent 4 seconds thinking about the topic. So I was thinking about this guy and the fact that he gets it in many, many areas far better than I would say the average Christian gets it. I don't think he gets it far better than people like you or the remnant church or those Christians that are using their God-given brains. But the average Christian, those are the people in the percentage majority, okay? They aren't using their God-given brains. They have allowed themselves to be scientifically dumbed down. They're the people this guy is talking about. And he's also talking about liberals and atheists who've allowed themselves to be dumbed down. You see what I'm saying? So we are arriving at a point where people on the left, atheists, liberals, whatever, and people who are, not all, people who are conservatives, Bible-believing Christians, etc., they're very, very powerful forces spending billions of dollars doing everything they can to keep us in a conflict with the left and the atheists and the liberals, because they know if we ever joined together to fight a common evil, we would win. So they're powerful, powerful institutions and organizations designed solely for the purpose of keeping the division and the hostilities turned up white hot with heat. Now, again, I'm not saying that we're going to unite on everything. We're not. There are many core issues where we don't see eye to eye, and I don't think we ever will. But that's not necessary to unite around fighting a common enemy. So what I hear increasingly among the smart people in the left, the ones with intellectual integrity, that's not all of them. It's the minority of the left that have intellectual integrity. That may offend people on the left, but it's true. Just as much as it's true that the majority of people who call themselves evangelical Christians really don't have intellectual integrity. They don't. So, you see, this guy and a smaller percentage of the left, or agnostics, or atheists, or liberals, or whatever, they understand that the real evil in this world is being generated by the globalist elite. And this guy made reference to him. He just used a slightly different term, the multinational corporations. And he mentioned their globalist trade treaties that were designed to destroy us, which most Christians didn't get until recently, until Trump ran for election. I was warning about that. I mean, that was like an incredible passion I had, was to warn God's people of the danger of these trade treaties, which are designed specifically for the intent of doing an end run around the Constitution and the Bill of Rights that will allow the super rich to get richer and to bankrupt the middle class and working class all around the world. That's the purpose of trade treaties. That's why we can't ever read them. And guess what? If you want to know which politicians, left or right, are in the pocket of the globalists, they're the ones always the champions of the trade treaties and telling us for our own good we're not allowed to read all the documents. You show me a politician, Democrat or Republican, that is a promoter of the trade treaties, help get the trade treaties passed, and I'll show you a guy or a girl or whatever who's a traitor to our nation, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the working class, and the middle class. And that includes some big names from both Democrats and Republicans. So this guy on the left got it. He understood that we're being dumbed down. He understood that the purpose of dumbing us down is to control us and sell us things. For example, it should be obvious to anybody whose brain works. And let me define, if I can, for you what I mean, whose brain works. That implies that the brain that God gave you is either plugged in, so it has energy, that you use it, you turn on the on switch, and that you grow it as God expects you to. If you use your God-given brain at all, now the atheist won't say it's a God-given brain, but she'll recognize it's a brain, or an atheist, or a liberal, or whatever. Anybody who uses their brain, left or right, atheist, agnostic, or Christian, it should be blatantly obvious to you. And if it's not, I'm not here to pick on you. I'm saying, man, you need to plug into this program on a regular basis or some other program in which you're forced to step it up with thinking and activating your brain. And you may not want to hear it, but if you don't hear it, you're going to go down, and you're going to go down very, very hard. And this guy made reference, he was a liberal, he made reference to both the pharmaceutical industries and the healthcare industries. And I forgot who the gentleman was, but somebody gave me the quote the other day. And I believe the guy was some big shot at Goldman Sachs or something. And they did a research project, I guess relatively recently, in which they said there's no future, he said, in curing diseases, making people not sick. He was speaking of economic investment. He said the future is in just perpetually taking care of people, perpetually selling them pills and giving them operations. So they're like a hamster in a hamster cage, just running but not going anywhere. He basically said, from an economic standpoint, and I don't know if he was speaking of his company or not, but he was saying, there's no economic future in investing in organizations and stuff that actually cure the sick, that actually heal people, and that actually make people better. Because he was saying that means that's the end of your cash flow. There's no more profit to be made. The money is in maintaining people who are sick and keeping them alive while they're sick, so you can sell them all the drugs and all the stuff, and then they're a cash cow. You can make a fortune. Now, that's the same is true of the pharmaceutical industries and the medical industrial complex. And if you have a problem with that, it's because your brain isn't turned on. And I don't care if you're a doctor. You may need surgery because it's obvious to anybody who uses their mind. That's why you never see them. They spend 40, 50, 60 years in all these bogus fundraising organizations that are raising, endless dollars for finding a cure to this and finding a cure to that. Well, look, ask yourself the question, how many of these fundraising organizations that are finding a cure for this or that after 40 years have actually found a cure for anything or even discovered anything that significantly improves somebody's condition with the disease that they're raising money to cure? It's next to nothing. They're in the business of keeping people perpetually sick, or they'd lose their cash cow. All the pharmaceutical companies, all of the nonsense that goes in big pharma. First of all, a lot of the stuff poisons people, makes them worse. Or they're like bufferins, or aspirins. Or if you start taking one medication, you're going to end up getting sick and having to take another medication. Let's take the pain pill crisis. What a bunch of phooey. Guess who developed the highly addictive painkillers in the first place? Big Pharma. So Big Pharma invents the pain-killing drugs. They market them, they give away free samples, they sell it like crazy, and then you have a certain percentage of the population, not the entire population, but a certain percentage, that get addicted. Okay? Seriously addicted for the wrong reasons. Now the government's in a crisis over the problem they created. And then you have some people who are in legitimate pain and they actually need a painkiller. Are you telling me after 50, 60 years of developing painkillers that the pharmaceutical industry could not have invented a non-addictive, safe painkiller by now? Of course they could. But they wanted it to be addictive, highly addictive, so they could keep their cash cow. In the same way, the cigarette companies deliberately made cigarettes to be more addictive than heroin. They did it on purpose. So you'd have endless customers. The purpose of painkillers being addictive is it is good for business. And this excuse at this late of a date saying we need to discover a painkiller that's effective and non-addictive, who are you kidding? You could have done that 50, 60 years ago. And this just caught us by surprise. The list goes on. The bogus medicines that are being sold that don't do anything, on and on and on. It's a big racket. It's a big screen. It's a big syndicate. Now, am I saying that all doctors are bad? No. Am I saying that every pharmaceutical company is bad? No. They do make good products. The doctors do, in many cases, have integrity. But they're all limited by who's ever on top that wants to make money through the decline of health and addiction versus healing people. So that's what we're up against. And this guy, this liberal, was pointing it all out. Now, let's take this liberal, and he's sitting in the minority, even among liberals, and let's take your average Christian or conservative. I would say there's a lot of Christians and conservatives who know exactly what I'm talking about. Many of you know exactly what I'm talking about. But there's an equal number, at least, that have no clue that they've been bamboozled. No clue whatsoever. And that is because they've been dumbed down. And you say, how did they get to be so dumbed down? And this is not a conspiracy theory. If you think that what I'm saying is a conspiracy theory, that's simply evidence that you have been programmed, just like a computer. You've been indoctrinated to believe that the kinds of things that I'm saying are a conspiracy theory, when in reality they're facts. So, here's the way it works. And this is why I spend so much time researching scientific mind control, indoctrination, hypnosis, persuasion, advertising, marketing, social engineering. And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to ask you a blunt question regarding a lot of things in your life. How do you, you personally, the person listening to me, how do you know for sure that you or somebody that you love, spouse, daughter, granddaughter, whatever, somebody you're close to, how do you know, beginning with you, if you are under scientific mind control or if you have been brainwashed or not? How do you know that? And I'm going to tell you that in most cases, the people who were the most seriously brainwashed and under scientific mind control are not aware at all that they're under scientific mind control or brainwashed. That's pretty serious. Now, we all suffer from the effects of that. But some people are just totally under somebody else's control and they don't realize it. And so this is what this smart liberal alluded to. Remember, and by the way, that's why I wrote my book, Conquering the Matrix. It deals the Matrix is simply this artificial reality that we've been programmed to believe exists. And in my book, Conquering the Matrix, I teach you how to recognize if you or if somebody you love has been brainwashed, is under scientific mind control, how it was done, and most importantly, how to undo it if you are under scientific mind control or you are brainwashed, and how this fits into Bible prophecy and how it's directly connected to what happened in Mystery Babylon when they used magic or magicians or sorcerers or wizards. Those were guys that knew how to put people under spells, trances, scientific mind control, use drugs to do it, or brainwash people. This has been an occultic science that goes way back. If you read How to Conquer the Matrix seriously and you pass it on to people that need to get it, that's why you should buy like 20 copies or something. I sell it very inexpensively at paulmcguire.us. And distribute. Don't distribute it to people that are totally resistant and are going to throw it in the garbage. Give it to somebody who's open, who wants to be set free. Okay, so what's necessary is that you have to dumb people down in order to accomplish your agenda. Now, the whole process of scientific mind control or being brainwashed, which is very similar to certain aspects of hypnosis, and it's also integrated in processes like social engineering, propaganda, advertising, marketing, things like that. So here's a basic premise. There are certain principles that you will discover are at work over and over again in all of these processes. And I became aware of that many years ago through studying Aldous Huxley, who most of you know because I refer to him all the time. And Aldous Huxley understood that the game plan of the elite was to establish what he called a scientific dictatorship. That's what we live in now globally. No matter what nation you live in, you're living to one degree or another under a scientific dictatorship which uses scientific mind control, social engineering, hypnotic techniques, propaganda, etc., to control your thinking, thoughts, and behavior. And he said at a convention in 1961 at the University of Berkeley, he said, in the truly effective scientific dictatorship, men and women will not even know they're slaves. Okay? They won't even be aware of the fact that they're under mind control. And then Huxley said, and in a perfectly created scientific dictatorship, men and women will actually be programmed to love their slavery or servitude. Now that was just the opening volley of what he said. Reading Huxley changed my life from a young child. And in many of my books, I go into depth about both of the Huxleys because they are laying the modern foundation for what's really going on in terms of scientific mind control. And I suggest you get my book, Mass Awakening, A Prophecy of the Future of America, the first one, and Absolutely Conquering the Matrix. Now, the way you learn anything, like one of the things that I do, because I write and research a lot, is I'm an incredible researcher, okay? I'm an incredible researcher because I learned to teach myself how to effectively gain information, which means I know how to get around the smoke screens. I know how to get around the disinformation. I know how to get around the propaganda, especially in the internet, and I know how to get to the truth. That's what a good researcher can do. A poor researcher can't filter out the difference between the truth and the lies. So, I spend massive amounts of time researching certain subjects. And whenever I'm teaching myself a new field or trying to understand something new, I can tell you one of the primary principles of learning. So this works as a positive for you. There's two reasons why you have to totally understand what I'm saying and master the subject. That's why I recommend you getting Conquering the Matrix. There's two reasons. Both are important to you. One is what we would call a positive reason. The other is a negative reason. But you have to know both. On the positive end, if you want to become smarter, more intelligent, more knowledgeable, know the truth, understand things that God wants you to understand, self-educate yourself, grow your brain, etc., one of the primary core principles is doing that is reading, by the way, self-educating yourself, and repetition. Every time I reread what I think I know, let's talk about Aldous Huxley and that whole thing. Every time I'll read a new historical book, a new article, or find new quotes about him, every single time I'm exposing myself to truths that are applicable by Aldous Huxley, but because of repetition, every time I repeat the process and sift through the information again, every single time new doors of understanding, new depths of research open up to me, that they were right there in front of me. They were right there in front of my eyes. But sometimes I couldn't crack the code of what was being said until the 50th time I read it. And usually that's a span of 10, 15, sometimes 20 years. Repetition is critical. It is one of the most powerful instruments that God has worked into his universe. And if you use that in the positive sense in life, you will go from being a weak, defeated, broken person to more than a conqueror in Christ Jesus, who is actually going to accomplish the goals that God has put in your heart. Repetition. And interestingly enough, my father taught me about this principle. I don't think he called it repetition, but it was basically the same thing. One of the things, my relationship with my father was healed. I led him to the Lord, years later. And he's in heaven now. And I forgive him, so I'm not speaking ill of him. But he wasn't the greatest father in the world when I was a child. But he did say some things to me that were brilliant and profound. And one thing he said to me, which he said a couple of times, but I never forgot it. I think God must have just anointed it. He said, Paul, and this is not an exact quote, it's as I remember. He said, Paul, in order to succeed at anything in life, in order to accomplish any goal in life, this is what I want to share with you. He says, I've used this principle my entire life, and whenever I apply this principle, I succeed, I've gained medals, and things that seem impossible become real. And this is what he shared to me. It's kind of a spin-off on repetition. He said, I began to realize he earned a track scholarship at the University of Missouri in Columbia, where I went to college. And he was from New York City, and I forgot what university or whatever he was attending. He served in the military, and then he won a scholarship, all expenses, because he was one of the most promising athletes, long-distance runner in America. So he won a big scholarship to the University of Missouri, and immediately afterwards he became the fastest man in the world and in the United States in college track as a long-distance runner. And then he became the second fastest man in track and running in the United States of America and the world. And he said, this is how I did it. And he wasn't saying it in a boastful way. But I learned so much in how he did it, because I knew he was fast. I mean, he was fast. And the muscles on his legs and all the muscles on his body that were related to running were like mind-blowing. So he said, I learned early in track that the only way to succeed is this, he said, and I believe you'll benefit from this if you absorb it. He said, you learn to deny your pain. You don't give in to your pain. He said, basically, you make the decision with your will that you're not going to give up. But then he said, and so I would say to myself and teach myself regarding running or anything else in life, and this is what he said. He said, you got to keep at it, 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 keep at it. And I don't know how long he would say keep at it, but it would be a couple of minutes. He said, you just keep at it, keep at it, keep at it, keep at it. He said, if you do that, if you will keep at it, keep at it, keep at it. And then he made a reference to how this works in terms of developing yourself or practicing. You know, he would say something like repetition. You do it over and over and over and over and over again. He was speaking of repetition. And then you keep at it, and you keep at it, you keep at it, you keep at it, which is also a form of repetition. And then he said, if you'll do that, and this is what blew my mind as a young kid, he said, you don't have to be the strongest, the fastest, the most talented guy in athletics or any other field, he said. But he said most people give up. Most people throw in the cards. Most people stop way below what they could do. And they said they may have been far more talented than me. The only thing I had, he said, is I kept at it, I kept at it, I kept at it. And in terms of training, I would do it over and over and over again. I'd repeat it, repeat it, repeat it. And he taught me this principle of keeping at it, repetition, and you just don't give up. Not because you're the most talented. You mentally decide you're going to do it over and over and over and over and again. You're going to get back and start running. You're going to keep at it, keep at it, keep at it, no matter how many rejections, no matter how many times you fail, no matter how many times the door is slammed in your face, no matter how many times people laugh at you. You just keep at it, you keep at it, you keep at it. And he said, if you will do this, eventually you will get the medals. The doors will open. Eventually you will accomplish what you set out to accomplish. Because he said, there's going to be a lot of people out there more talented, richer, and everything else than you are. But they're not willing to keep at it, to keep at it, to keep at it, to repeat it over and over again. So they give up, even though they're more talented than you are. They stop keeping at it. They give up. He says most of them do. But if you'll keep at it, keep at it, keep at it, keep at it, and repeat it over and over again, he says those doors will open to you. He says that's a secret I want to share with you. And he said it a number of times. And I didn't listen to everything my father said, but I'll tell you what he said I never forgot. Because I used that. It kind of went into my mind subconsciously, but it would reappear in my conscious mind. I used that principle because there was many times in life I was in many situations where I knew I was not the wealthiest person. I knew I was not the most gifted or the most talented. In fact, that occurred to me all the time in my life. But I knew that my father's principle worked. I believed it. And so I would keep at it, keep at it, keep at it. I would repeat it over and over and over and over again. Okay? And eventually the doors opened. Now, that my father was teaching me, he was tapping into this law of repetition. And so, in any kind of area, there's so many areas where I've succeeded, and it's not because I'm the smartest guy, the most talented, the most gifted, because I kept at it. And I'm telling you something, I've had 1 billion doors shut in my face. And with research and learning, you become wise and understand things that people all around you can't understand. And it's not that you're smarter than they are. It's just that you kept at it, you kept at it, you kept at it, you kept repeating it, you sit researching over and over and over again. And if you do that, all kinds of things open up. Now, I wanted to share that with you because that's a biblical principle. It's said in so many biblical principles throughout the Bible. If you own that truth and if you apply it and share it with your children, I guarantee you, if they keep at it and you involve repetition over and over again, there is nothing impossible for you in your life with God. Okay? You just got to keep at it. So now that's the positive side of that. My father would say when he was running, he said he would run so fast because he was determined to win that his guts, his stomach was screaming in pain because he was exerting himself and pressing himself far beyond his physical abilities. His stomach was like screaming in pain and agony, and he just kept at it, kept at it, kept at it. And then he'd go to the finish line first. And sometimes the pain would be so bad, the nausea, he literally, forgive the grossness, but after passing the line, he'd go run over into a semi-private place and vomit. I've heard many people in athletics do that because he pressed himself beyond beyond any conception of what he thought he could endure. So that's repetition, the power of repetition. Where does it say in the Bible? All over the place. I'll give you one example. Train up the child in the way he or she should go, and when they're old, they won't depart from it. So you give your kids biblical knowledge, biblical truths, biblical wisdom. You keep at it, you keep at it, you keep at it. You ignore their rebellion. You ignore their disobedience. You keep at it, you keep at it, you keep at it. You give them wisdom, godly wisdom. And even if they rebel for 10 or 20 years and walk away from the Lord for 10 or 20 years, mark my words, if you prayed over them and you kept at it and kept at it with repetition and you trained them up in the way he or she, your child, shall go, the Lord says, when he or she is old, they will not depart from it. You have programmed them, and programming can be positive, with God's ways and God's words. And so they're always going to return to it. Look, this is understood for good and evil. The Bible teaches it to raise godly children. You've got to repetition. You've got to train them up in the way or program them, literally. But evil people know how to do this. This is why the communists and the Nazis and all the other dictatorships and the scientific dictatorships, they all know you've got to grab a kid's mind when they're really, really young, before their parents can influence them. And you got to brainwash them through repetition and program them to hate God, not believe in Christianity, to believe in all kinds of principles that God considers evil. So, Huxley said, this is the negative part of repetition, that the essential formula for modern scientific mind control and brainwashing is, first, shock or trauma. Okay? You have to shock the human system, traumatize the human system. You use drugs. Those drugs can be psychedelic drugs, they can be marijuana, they can be any number of drugs. Because the goal is you've got to put people in a hypnotic state in order to program them. Drugs put people in a hypnotic state. Okay, so they're suggestible. All programming, please understand this, that's why you need to read Conquering the Matrix. All programming, and even positive training, occurs at the level of the subconscious mind. Not just the conscious mind. The heavy-duty programming, good or bad, occurs in the subconscious mind. The conscious mind is most easily accessed when you put people in a trance state, which is like a hypnotic state. Actually, trance state and hypnotic state are synonymous. That's why you use drugs, Huxley said. LSD was a very important drug. But there's many drugs that'll put you in a hypnotic state, or what's called cognitive dissonance, where you kind of enter that dreamy, passive state. And then you program them with words, symbols, visuals, ideas when they're in that hypnotic state. That doesn't mean they're walking around thinking they're a duck. Many people are walking around in a hypnotic state that you talk to all the time. It's just it's so subtle, it's not easily recognized. And then you use repetition, Huxley said. Repeating the visuals, the audio commands, the ideas, the beliefs, over and over and over again. Repetition, 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 until you convince the subconscious mind that the illusion or lie that you're putting into their subconscious, suddenly your being snaps and you believe that is the true reality versus the true reality. And then the person is under mind control. You see how simple that is, the way that works? It can work for good or bad. Now, let's review the basic elements of scientific mind control: indoctrination, persuasion, propaganda, social engineering, or whatever you want to call it. L. Ron Hubbard, who I don't subscribe to all his teachings. He was the founder of Scientology. But L. Ron Hubbard, who was definitely not a Christian, I definitely don't embrace all of his ideas, was an expert on scientific mind control. I suspect, because I did a lot of research about him, and by studying the life of L. Ron Hubbard, which I don't recommend for everybody, it opened all kinds of doors of understanding. All kinds of doors of understanding. It seems Hubbard himself went through this pain, drugs, hypnosis, scientific mind control experimentation as a naval officer when he was hospitalized by the Navy for some kind of temporary psychological problem. But Hubbard was a genius. Not necessarily a good genius, but he was a genius. And he understood what the processes were, or was actually trained in what the processes were of scientific mind control. That's why Hubbard came out with the first book which explained scientific mind control, back I think in the 50s or early 60s, in which he identified the basic formula for the first time publicly of how scientific mind control works, and he called it pain, drugs, hypnosis. Notice the words pain, drugs, hypnosis. The purpose of pain, extreme pain, that's what we're talking about. Extreme pain also characterized as shock, trauma, being traumatized, extreme pain, whether it's physical pain, whether it's sleep deprivation, whether it's psychological shock or trauma. It disrupts your normal psychological equilibrium. It throws you off balance. And being psychologically off balance through pain, drugs, and hypnosis makes you vulnerable to being programmed with a new set of beliefs. So first you add the stimulus of pain, drugs, and hypnosis. Then drugs can be like LSD, marijuana, but drugs, we need to be very careful, can be now electronic drugs. You know, binaural tones and isochronic tones of binaural beats can do very good things, but they also alter the state of consciousness hypnotically, and they can be used for evil. Drugs can be Wi-Fi signals. Drugs can be EMF waves, alpha, beta, theta, delta. Remember, as I've said in the Prophecy of the Future of America, your television set, since the invention of television, constantly emits a 10 Hz alpha wave signal, which is a hypnotic brainwave state. That's why people, you see them look like zombies when they watch TV, like they're drugged. They are drugged. They are kind of zombified because they're in a hypnotic state produced by the continual bombardment of 10 Hz, which is alpha wave, electromagnetic frequency. Okay? But the alpha wave also increases people's ability to concentrate and pay attention, and it's very good in order to help you learn something. Kids with ADD can benefit from a 10 Hz alpha wave. Anybody whose mind is running all over the place and they can't concentrate on studying, if they're exposed to 10 Hz EMF wave music, they can concentrate and focus. But the 10 Hz alpha wave has a big problem with it, and mind control scientists know what that is. On one hand, it increases your ability to concentrate and focus, but the downside of the 10 Hz EMF wave, alpha wave, okay, is that even though it enhances your ability to focus and concentrate, it degrades 10 Hz EMF waves, like television, degrades your ability to critically think, to question the material that's being presented to you. It degrades your ability to analyze or discern or evaluate or slice open hidden agendas within messages and education you may be exposed to when you're exposed to alpha waves. You see, when you're being subjected to 10 Hz alpha waves, like television broadcasts, but they can come to you from any number of things. Why do you think it's used? Why do you think it's the norm for a television broadcast to communicate a 10 Hz EMF wave? It produces a relaxant, a euphoria, a peace, a calmness, slightly sedative effect, and your brain then absorbs as true any hidden political messages, social messages, any hidden psychological messages in the music and the content and in the visuals of all the television programming that you're watching. You just soak it up like a sponge in a non-discriminatory manner. But that means people learned a long time ago, if you want to feed a mass population with propaganda messages, if you want to use television as a mind control mechanism, it's the perfect medium to do that because you've got the people's attention. They're going to remember everything you said because they're in a semi-hypnotic state, and they're not going to question it. They're not going to see through it. They're not going to use their critical or analytical thinking. They're just going to accept everything as though it was true, and they'll remember it. That's the ideal mental state to be in for mind control and programming people. It's also, for the advertiser, a super win. Because when you're running your commercials, and they can be stupid commercials, okay, that if you were in your right mind, you'd be laughing about because it's so obvious what they're trying to do. But when you're in a stupefied 10HZ alpha wave state, you look at those commercials, you don't question because you don't have an analytical functioning brain, a critical thinking functioning brain. You just absorb and believe everything the television commercials tell you is true. But most importantly, where you're making the decisions to believe all this stuff and where you're storing all the files and visuals about the stuff you believe, it's embedded in your subconscious. It shows up in your conscious decisions, your conscious choices, your conscious values. But it's the subconscious that they're after. That's where the giant vault is that holds all the information. Now, you need to know that. That has been a scientific fact since the 50s in the invention of television. How many Christians know that? Practically zero. You know why? They're dumbed down. They're dumbed down. Television dumbs you down. You know why television dumbs you down? This is all really simple stuff. And again, you need to understand what I'm talking about. You need to own it. You can't just have a passing interest in it. You have to own these truths. You have to be the master of these truths. And I suggest you get Conquering the Matrix, A Prophecy, The Future of America, and Mass Awakening. Now, the thing to understand is that, okay, this is going to be fun. It depends where you are in your head. For me, it's fun. It's like riding a surfboard on the ultimate wave. I forgot where the ultimate waves are, but you've seen these movies where surfers travel the world to find the ultimate waves, and they're located in certain areas during certain times of the year. And you see them surfing, and they're just gliding across this endless wave, and it's just like, wow, I wish I could do that. Well, that's how I feel when I research stuff, and this, don't take this the wrong way. God created our brains. God also created our brains to function in a capacity that goes far beyond, but includes the 10HZ alpha wave, the beta wave, the delta wave, the theta wave, and so on and so forth. These different frequencies for different modalities of thoughts and emotions. When I do research, and then there comes that epiphany where all the research comes together and you can see clearly, that song, I Can See Clearly Now. It's corny, but I'm saying it to you because I hope you remember that song, I Can See Clearly Now, and then associate that with what I'm talking about. You enter what's called, what psychologists call the aha moment. The aha moment is a moment where your perception, your understanding, you actually get a revelation of what you're talking about, and it produces a high state in your mind because it triggers the high state brain waves where superior perception, superior analysis, where all the dots come together into a meaningful whole. That's a high. For me, that's far higher than bungee cord jumping, which I would never do, because I plan on having a spine that works when I'm older, or surfing. So, in a second, I'm going to take you into an aha moment. And no, it's not because I'm in the New Age. I'm a biblical Christian, just like you are. But are you telling me David didn't experience an aha moment when he got rid of Goliath? Of course he did. God, you think these athletes who are Christians and stuff who win an Olympic gold medal or bronze or silver, they don't have an aha moment? Of course they do. God created your brain to function that way. It's not sinful, as long as you're not doing something immoral or criminal. So you're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. The best of this program is yet to come. In fact, it's going to get really powerful because as we share this together, it's gonna put you on a mountaintop experience of perception and understanding that if you will grasp it, and you can grasp it because God's given you the mind of Christ, it will change your life forever. I'm Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us, that's paulmcguire.us, and we'll be back in just a moment. You're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. Okay, let's get into this. Let's get into an aha moment together, and let's not be afraid of the term. It's a psychological term. It's not a New Age term. Really, to be blunt, there are dangers in what's called the New Age, because many of the New Age teachings are based on occultic, ancient, mystical teachings which are in contradiction to the Bible. We need to be careful about this. But we can't go overboard and ignore reality and call it New Age just because we don't understand it. The aha moment is that moment of exhilaration. It's kind of like you have this heightened sense. It's like a mountaintop experience. When everything seems together and your perception or perspective is brand new and it's everything becomes clear. So let me share something with you. And many of you have probably had this in your own life. Everything. You could be a cook. You can be a truck driver. You could be a salesman. I know salesmen get this experience all the time. In fact, I've been in enough businesses or known people in enough businesses. Let's take the field of sales. Any salesperson, male or female, can tell you that there are those times where they enter that aha moment. They're like in the groove. Okay, they're operating at like from a higher place. And it's like when they're in that higher state of consciousness, in that aha moment, it's like every phone call they make, every presentation physically they make in terms of sales leads to a sale. It's like they're electrically charged with this energy, and they know it, and they'll ride it, and just like they'll make sale after sale after sale, phone call produces sale after sale, and it's like they're invincible, and they're riding that moment because they know it doesn't last forever, but it comes around every once in a while. Salespeople know what I'm talking about. Same thing with athletes. I've seen people play basketball, especially when they're in that moment, and it's like everything they do, from dribbling to from maneuvering on the court, from taking that shot and where the basketball sinks through the hoop effortlessly time after time. They can go a whole game in that zone. But it's sometimes hard to get back in that zone. Preachers feel it. Just about everybody who's listening right now, you've experienced that kind of moment of being in the zone. No matter what you do. You can be driving in the freeway and all of a sudden, it's not because you're necessarily speeding, it's like all these potential accidents are like coming at you, especially in LA. But for some reason, you're maneuvering and you're not getting hit. And it's like you're in this zone where your abilities to drive your car are heightened. So, many of you know what I'm talking about. So I do a lot of research in the stuff that I just talked about. And doing that, there are many times when I'll get into a aha moment. Now, let me say, and I think this would apply to every one of you who have experienced these aha moments. Let's not forget that although the aha moment is fun, it's exhilarating, it's a mountaintop experience, it's a groove. Let's not forget that what gives us the space to experience an aha moment is the fact that behind the scenes, on the days when we're not in that aha moment, we're studying, we're practicing, we're keeping at it, we're repetitively doing things, we're doing the work, we're doing the thinking, we're doing the research, we're doing the planning. So behind all the aha moments is a lot of blood, sweat, and tears at work. And you all know what I'm talking about. That's kind of like stuck in your computer banks. You had to do a lot of work, a lot of reading, a lot of prep or whatever. And then the reason it could come together is because you were faithful to sow, if you will, all that hard work stuff into your being. And so what happened is when you entered the aha moment, part of you just accessed all those research and work and study, and it came together for you in a beautiful moment. But behind the scenes, there's a lot of hard work. A lot of rejection, a lot of pain, a lot of trial and error, etc., etc. So every once in a while in my research, things will happen, and I'll have an aha moment. Either it will be a new realization, a higher level of realization of understanding, or sometimes you enter this like high state, an aha moment, when information comes at you and you see it with just like brand new eyes, and it's like electrified, and it's like, wow, it hits you. You already knew this stuff, but now it becomes revelation. So I'm walking into the room where the flat screen television is, and I was thinking about all the stuff that I'm talking to you about. And it's evening, and a tape is being played. And I don't watch late night comedians, like I said. We'll tape them, and we might survey, usually part of the opening monologue or the guest to see if there's anything worth watching, which is almost never. But I've noticed, since I only dip into these programs sporadically and infrequently, whenever I land on these late night comedians, and I forgot how many there are, was there 4 or 5 big ones? Inevitably, whenever I land on them, in the first 10 or 15 minutes of their show, they're always bashing Trump. They're always doing an anti-Trump, hyper-negative attack, pathetically bad, sarcastic humor about Trump. It's monotonous. And it says to me, they're doing it every stinking night. All of the channels. And then I go into an aha moment. I already know I already know. I've already taught myself why and how this process works. But for some reason, it just comes on me, and I'm in a state of realization and an aha moment where what I know intellectually just explodes to a much higher level, the level of like a download or a revelation. So I'm sitting there, and I have an epiphany, an aha moment, where all of a sudden, pow, I have a realization of what I already know, but the realization is kind of like the fireworks of what you know. You know what I'm talking about? And then there's a whole series of almost stroboscopic images and visuals and understandings that rip through my mind, where all the dots come together. And I say to myself, I said it out loud, I said, this is scientific mind control at work. We are in the scientific dictatorship that Huxley warned us about. This on-the-nose, scheduled, assigned, predicted anti-Trump humor, anti-Trump attacks by these comedians every single stupid, stinking night at the same time is not accidental. It's not based on the personal politics or the bias of the comedians. Okay? This is a deliberate, they're under orders, this is planned. The people, not the heads of the networks. The heads of the networks would probably say, this is stupid, it's killing our ratings, because it is, by the way. But the people who own the networks, and remember, it's just 3 corporations that all own all the mainstream media. When I first began writing books, it was 200 corporations that own the mainstream media. Now it's just 3 globalist corporations that own all of the mainstream media, and they control everything about its content. And it's obvious that they've given orders to the news departments, the comedians, the shows, etc., to hammer Trump 24/7. And they have told, one way or another, those comedians, you are to begin your opening monologue with a hot, rapid-fire attack, sarcastic humor, skits, whatever, attacking and degrading Trump. Now, and I'm not saying their producer came out and actually said that, because that's not the way TV works. But they're getting the message one way or another subtly, because I've worked in that industry. You know what the rules are. They don't have to write them on a chalkboard for you. Because, first of all, it's impossible that all these comedians would choose night after night to begin their opening monologues with the same anti-Trump jokes and skits every single night, knowing, because they do know, they're not stupid, that they're driving away a huge percentage of their potential audience, because about half the country voted for Trump or are sympathetic to Trump, and they don't really find the comedians' jokes and the celebrities' jokes, anti-Trump, night after night, entertaining. In fact, they'll actually turn it off and maybe turn it back on when the guests come on. They know this because they have rating systems. How many people are watching the comedians at this time, and in comparison to the other networks. It's a loser for them to do this, but they do it anyway. So why do they do it even though it's a loser for them commercially? And it's hurting them. Going back to the great comedians, okay, like Johnny Carson. Johnny Carson had an audience that was probably, 40 million people larger than any of these nitwit comedians. Now, it was a different time technology-wise, but Johnny Carson had enough common sense not to attack half of his audience's political beliefs. He recognized that he wanted to have a lot of Democrats and Republicans in his audience, or he would fail. And so did all the other big people like Ed Sullivan and all the others. Okay? So these comedians are not the funniest guys in the world, but they're not stupid. They're under orders. And guess why they're under orders, as are the rest of the shows during the day. But late night comedy, whether it's Saturday Night Live or Jimmy Kimmel or him, whatever, I can't remember their names. They're doing the same thing every night, which is anti-Trump bashing. Not because it's good for their audience share, not because it's popular with their audience, but because they're under orders from the globalist elite. Why? Because the people who really run things understand what is happening in terms of psychological communication via the comedians at that particular time at night. Now, review this scientific data with me. It's easy. I'm going to do bullet points. You'll be able to figure it out in 30 seconds. Number 1, what is unique about the time of day that the late night comedians do their anti-Trump bashing opening monologues? That's the time when people are really winding down, okay, psychologically. By that time, many Americans have had smoked a couple of joints. Who knows what else? Maybe they've taken their sleeping pills, waiting for them to kick in. They've had their booze or whatever. In any case, they're more susceptible, more vulnerable because they're tired and they know they're getting ready to go to sleep, so they relax. So now you have the 10HZ working, but you have the fact that people are already going into a hypnotic state because of the time of day. They're unwinding, they're tired, they're fatigued, they may be medicated, alcohol, whatever. And what is the rule of mind control? Pain, drugs, hypnosis. So they're in a drugged state, either electronically, either biologically, because they're tired and they're letting go and they want to laugh a little bit. And many, millions and millions and millions of Americans fall asleep watching television. So they're in the process. A huge percent of the population is in the process of drifting off to sleep. When you're in that process of drifting off to sleep, you're in a hypnotic state. You know what I'm talking about. You're half asleep, half awake. That's the perfect time to implant programs and beliefs into the subconscious mind from a mind control standpoint. And so they're in this state of consciousness, which is the optimal state of consciousness during the day to program people. It's when the late night comedians come on. Their defenses are down because they're ready to laugh, okay? So they're open, they're vulnerable, their subconsciouses are accessible. And so that is why the late night comedians are under orders from very high up, although they may not know the dynamics of it themselves, that the first 10 or 15 minutes of their monologue is to consist primarily of anti-Trump humor and ridicule. Because the mass audience is already in a hypnotic state for a variety of reasons. It's going right into the subconscious, which makes the changes. And then, while they're being brainwashed with the anti-Trump stuff, they begin to fall asleep because many people fall asleep to TV, they're drugged, whatever. And even if they're enter that initial sleep stage and the comedian keeps blabbing on against Trump, it's going right into their subconscious. What you have right there is mass mind control. So I'm having this like super aha moment when it's like I see it at a global level, hitting millions of homes, and why this is being done on purpose. It's not an accident. And I said, of course, this is the most psychological, optimal time to brainwash people because they're already in a hypnotic state. So they're being hypnotized, they're being programmed. And that's why you have the moods, the emotions, the pro-Trump feelings, the anti-Trump feelings. That's why the polls are changed and manipulated, because the consciousness or the thinking and the beliefs of the vast majority of America and people around the world is being directly controlled by puppet masters pulling puppet strings, because they've programmed the average American to believe what they want them to believe. And it's not just the Trump stuff. There's a whole social agenda being programmed in. There's a whole political agenda being programmed in. You're actually creating robots, androids, cyborgs, who appear for all practical purposes to be normal and awake. But it never ceases to amaze me how all these independent thinkers always think the same. Now, you should know that, because you should be on your guard. Not in a paranoid state. And remember this theory that I learned at the University of Missouri studying the psychology of advertising, where I was taught that the most amazing discovery that psychological experts who were doing research into advertising discovered was, just because the person watching your television commercial, looking at your ad or whatever, just because they're smart enough to understand how and why you're trying to sell them a particular product, just because they're aware of techniques that you're using to sell them a particular product, when they would come and visit these people 6 months later in their home, they discovered that the same people who understood the craftiness of the advertising, what it was intended to do, it made no difference in their buying choices. These same people who understood the game actually went out and bought all the products and services that they knew what the agenda was. So what the advertising experts, psychological experts, realized, there's no correlation between knowing what you're being sold, why you're being sold, or how you're being sold, and your behavior. So you translate this over to late night TV. Just because you're falling asleep, being aware of the agenda, being aware of the techniques, does not in any way stop or prevent you from being programmed. And in fact, you are programmed. If I was to do a survey with every one of you, because I've seen it at work in my own life, if you're ruthlessly honest and you looked at your attitudes and beliefs about all kinds of things going on in our society now, I guarantee you that the vast majority of you have changed considerably a whole long series of beliefs in the past year, 2, 3, and especially 10 years. You have radically changed in what you accept and what you don't accept, whether you realize it or not, because it works. Okay? It works unless you have a plan of defense and unless you know how to protect yourself from being affected by scientific mind control. And this is essential. This is where the spiritual battle for the world and our nation, this is the battlefield. It's in the battlefield of the mind. It's in the battlefield of the subconscious. It's in the integration of the spiritual world, the biological brain world, the psychological world. It's in the realm of your ideas, your thoughts, and your behaviors. This is where the spiritual battle is taking place. So, in effect, the spiritual battle is taking place, yes, in the physical dimension. It's taking place, yes, in the conscious psychological dimension where you're aware of things. But the big battle is taking place in your subconscious, and let's never forget that the subconscious mind and parts of your conscious mind are linked scientifically to the spiritual realm, the invisible realm, that the Bible says exists, and it does exist, but quantum physics and string theory, before Einstein, made a radical discovery about the nature of reality. All scientists used to believe that there were, at one time, when I was growing up, only 3 dimensions. See, communists today, this shows you just how ridiculously outdated communism, progressivism, Marxist philosophy is. It's a dinosaur running around. It's a joke. Because they still subscribe to the theory that there's only 3 dimensions. What the dimensions that exist are the dimensions that you can perceive with your senses, such as sight, hearing, tactile, whatever. Okay? If you can't perceive something with your physical senses, it doesn't exist, according to the old science and Marxism and stuff. But the new revolution in science that took place before Einstein and was developed by quantum physics and string theory is that our world, our reality, is composed of at least 10 to 13 different dimensions. Something, by the way, the ancient Hebrew scribes and scholars knew way back in the Old Testament. They recognized there was 10 to 13 dimensions. So now that science recognizes that real reality is not just 3 dimensions, but 10 to 13 dimensions, that has opened up all kinds of things about the nature of reality, consciousness, perception, energy, things like time travel, things like just an endless number of things and possibilities. It also scientifically proves It doesn't directly scientifically prove the Bible, but it should, because it's admitting that what the Bible said for 5,000 years or more, which was that there was a all-important spiritual realm or invisible realm, that wasn't, hocus pocus, fairy tale talk, science fiction, like science criticized it for being. But the reality is there has to be a spiritual dimension or an invisible world or a parallel universe, because quantum physics says there's 10 to 13 dimensions. And many of those dimensions are outside of the dimensions of time and space. Now, we're going to back off on the acceleration upwards on this, because if we're not careful, we're going to top out. And so many of you can handle it. You'll enjoy the ride. Isn't that what Nissan said? Enjoy the ride. Many of you would enjoy the ride, but many of you will fall off the ride if we go any higher. Because already this is a lot. And if we get back on the ride and we begin to integrate scalar technology, scalar waves, the human bioenergetic field, biophotons, the life force of God that was every man and woman before the fall of man was infused with eternal life, or the life force of God. They were immortal beings. Well, let's use our brains for a moment. That life force, that eternal life, the life of God that gives you eternal life and perfect health and stuff, I don't care what science says or doesn't say. The truth of the matter is, that life force is real. Eternal life is real. You can measure it, you can quantify it, you can observe it through technology and science. The problem is, science hasn't gotten far enough along to measure the life force, the eternal life of God. It's there. How do you think Christ resurrected from the dead? Well, you can't say that's a fairy tale. The problem is not with Jesus resurrecting from the dead. It's the problem that the scientists are still in the Stone Age. They don't have the instruments and the machines capable of measuring and accessing that real data. And the death force, which has entered the human race from the fall, is also measurable scientifically and quantifiable scientifically. But once again, scientists have not built the machines to do it yet. But you can't say it's not true, because science is still in kindergarten. I mean, for crying out loud, let's get real. Christians need to step it up. They need to step up their game. You need to step up your game. I need to step up my game. We need to step it up, because we have truth on our side, for crying out loud. Do you think that all the things that Jesus Christ did and God did in the Bible is attributed to some mystical force? Of course not. That force is measurable. It's quantifiable. It's identifiable. The problem is, mankind's technology and science is way, way behind the game. Okay? Never forget that. Don't be intimidated by science. For years, do you know what? I could sit here for an hour, which I don't have time, and list all the things that science has said is true, including the time when science declared the earth was flat, by the way. It was not religious people, it was scientists. Scientists still claims that we came from monkeys and microbes. All the things that science said was true. And for hundreds of years, science said, due to scientific empirical evidence, that our reality is only composed of what we can perceive through our physical senses, like touch, seeing, hearing, etc. And if we can't perceive it through our physical senses, then it simply does not exist. They were dogmatic about this, by the way, and would ridicule Christians for suggesting otherwise. Well, guess what happened? Science finally came out of the Stone Age developed quantum physics and string theory, and now they're saying as a scientific fact that science has proven there are at least 10 to 13 dimensions. So they were wrong all along about the 3 dimensions, just like they're wrong about the miracles of Christ, the healing power of Christ, the resurrection power of Christ, the eternal life of God, and the death force and the activation of the law of sin and death. See, we are so far ahead. We need to have confidence in the truthfulness of the Bible and not be intimidated by a bunch of gobbledygook that scientists spew out that they can't prove. Now, I want to take you higher, and there's nothing wrong with being taken higher, by the way. Not higher in the sense of wanting to be God, but higher in the sense of if God built you, let's say you're a car, and God built you to travel safely at 2,000 miles an hour on this special car only to be driven on special kinds of freeways, and you're going at 65 miles an hour, well, you're not being efficient with what God gave you. He gave you a perfectly safe vehicle that can drive 2,000 miles an hour, so you should be driving it, assuming the safety conditions are in place, at the appropriate speed. Okay, you're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. This message will change people's lives. This message will affect people that are skeptics. That will affect people that are hungry for truth. But the only way they're going to hear this message is if someone like you decides to act on what I'm sharing with you and send this message far and wide through your social media. And then you'll help change lives for Jesus Christ, which means changing this world for Jesus Christ. Number 2, everything we do is possible because people are committed to being regular intercessory prayer warriors with this ministry, where you're committed on a daily basis for praying for me, my family, this ministry, that you're true prayer partners and prayer warriors. And finally, we are able to do what we do because people like you are listening to God, are asking God what you can do in terms of financially giving and donating to this ministry. So I want to thank all of you who are obeying the Lord through prayer, through sending out these messages, through your financial donations and contributions. I want to thank all of you that are faithful in doing that. And I want to encourage you to keep giving because we have many, many, many more people to reach and many exciting things to announce in the relatively near future. I ask all of you, whether it's prayer or distributing or whatever, the only thing I ask you to do is go to God in prayer. It doesn't have to be a big, long thing. And simply don't come to Him with your mind made up about anything. Come to Him with an open heart and spirit. Ask God what you can do. Ask God to give you new ideas, new instructions, whether it's direction for your prayers or how to spread the message or your financial donations and contributions. Simply ask God what to do. He will speak to you, by the way. And then whatever God tells you to do, no matter how out of the box it is, obey Him and do what the Lord tells you to do. And you will find, if you're faithful and obedient to what the Lord helps you to do, that the Lord will be faithful and obedient to you. Not because you're earning God's blessings, but because that's a law of the kingdom. Those people that are faithful in small things, God promotes, God blesses, and He puts in charge of larger things. It's the law of use. If you are using what God has given you, if you're being faithful with what God has already given you, then God will expand and bless and prosper you. That's not earning, it's demonstrating faithfulness. You know, many people don't realize that the vast majority of my ministry, I toiled in obscurity. I spoke for years, just nobody knew I was speaking, because I would speak at Christian businessmen luncheons with like 5 people or 7 people, if it was a good day, 20 people or 25 people. But most of the time it was 5 or 7 people. I would speak at these business luncheon meetings. And I was in the full-time ministry. I had to support, most of my life I supported my ministry with 1 job, 2 jobs, 3 jobs. So, but I was faithful. I remember it was getting discouraging because the time finally came when I was speaking at some giant conferences. This is decades ago. I was speaking at some giant conferences, and I said, finally, Lord, books are being produced, and I'm going on television, and I'm speaking at larger conferences. And then I invited my wife and kids to come hear me speak at a local hotel, which was a decent hotel, because I wanted them to see, my ministry and stuff. And I must say, we're not to judge, the effectiveness by the numbers, but I was at least hoping that there would be a decent attendance, so, it would authenticate what I'm doing in front of my kids and my wife. And I remember, I always preached, no matter how small or how large, I always gave it the same amount of passion and power, and it would be just as prayed up. But I get there, and, it's like 5 or 7 people. I can't name one, because one guy, he was really special. He was an unusual guy in the sense that if I told you what he did, and the only thing I'll say, he was in the movie business, the actor, so to speak, that he dealt with, every one of you would know who that was. And that was special to my kids. So I remember preaching my heart out and stuff, but I was discouraged. It was like, Lord, I'm inviting my wife and kids, and your kids are judging you. And but I kept at it. I kept at it. And anybody can tell you, I preached with just as much fire and you can call far and wide, whether it was a classroom at a seminary or a tiny church or a small meeting. I would preach with just as much passion and fire as I preached when I preached to large crowds. Just the Spirit of God would take hold of me, and I'd give it everything I got. And you know what I'm talking about. People, many of you listening know exactly what I'm talking about, whether you're in the ministry or not. And it was like, it seemed like my days of obscurity went on forever. And then slowly and incrementally, things began to change. Doors began to open that were larger and larger. Books began to be written. I've been writing books for years, but they would receive national recognition. Doors would open on television. And then all of a sudden, all those decades of toil, all the seeds planted, all the rejection, humiliation, doors slammed in my face. All of a sudden, God began to raise me up. And I'm still, I'm not Billy Graham or anything, for crying out loud, but we reach millions and millions of people every 3 months or so. When I say millions and millions of people, you have to kind of reconfigure it because they're censoring the internet. It could be anywhere from 30 to 15 million people every 3 months. Before they started censoring the internet, it was easy to determine that I was reaching 30, 35, as with most of the people you know out there. I don't think those numbers have shrunk that much. They would lead you to believe that they have, but I don't think they've shrunk. But let's not kid ourselves. When the major search engines, etc., and social media things are deliberately seeking out Christians, prophecy people, conservatives, and making you disappear in the engines, it has to have some kind of impact. But my trust is in God, not in social media or whatever. because I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. Because I know if God shuts one door, this ministry right now, we're already moving at high speed. We have alternative major distribution set up now because we're faithful with your donations and stuff, and so we're not like unprepared. Oh, believe me, we're prepared, more prepared than I can talk about publicly. But the thing I wanted to say was that there was a reason. Now that I look back, there was a reason for all the rejection, the small numbers of people, the doors slammed in my face, etc., etc. The primary reason was God was good to me. God blessed me through all that. But the refiner's fire does what it's supposed to do. It refines you. So a lot of, I see a lot of people make mistakes in the ministry today. And the only reason I'm not making them is because I went through the refiner's fire. Okay? Sometimes the fire is good for you. We hate it at the time, but it's a great preparation for ministry because your faith, crying out loud, if you don't have faith, you'd go down. So your faith grows, baby. And so if you're in that place, take heart. God is faithful. Oh, He is faithful on His time schedule. And so God began to bless and prosper and raise up. And by God's grace entirely, doors are opening. I can't even discuss all the doors that are opening to influence significantly people in the highest places in the land. And that's because of people like you who are also faithful in season and out of season. Those of you that, what you want to know is the Holy Spirit with Paul McGuire. Does Paul McGuire love Jesus? Is he faithful to the Word? Is he winning souls? And then you obey the Lord by praying. You obey the Lord by spreading the message far and wide. You obey the Lord by donations and contributions. And you share, by the way, in the faithfulness and the spiritual harvest. You share in it. So when it comes to raising people up, when it comes to God blessing, when it comes to God covering, He knows that this ministry is not a one-man show. It never has been. It exists because you and I are partners called by Jesus to do something. And we are going to take the land. And that's possible because of you. So I want to thank all of you. I don't take it for granted. I read your letters, I read your notes, and I read your email. I try to answer as many as I can or send you. Many of you get a short note from me on envelopes that come from Paradise Mountain Church. We have a Paradise Mountain Church coming soon. Anyway, God bless you. Keep the faith. Remember, I didn't share this with you to scare you. I shared this with you so that you would understand that the same power that's used to control people for evil purposes, you can use that. You can use the truths, the good truths, to build and strengthen your inner man and your inner woman, body, soul, and spirit. You can use some of those principles, okay? And they can be the very keys to releasing kingdom power in your life. That's just like mind-blowing. So God bless you. I'm Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. We have specials on books. We have postings of TV show interviews I've been on recently in the last week. We have hundreds of free articles. We have the full Paul McGuire archives you can send for free. You can send to people for free. We got endless videos on YouTube, and we have the brand new Roku Channel. Paul McGuire Ministries is the name of the Roku Channel. We have 100 hours of broadcast quality programming, and that's just the beginning. But it's broadcast quality programming. We will double, triple, quadruple that number soon, but that's just part of it. We're going to expand it way beyond Roku. We have not made it available on certain video channels because of reasons I don't want to discuss, but you're smart enough to figure out why. Because, you're smart enough to figure that out. Anyway, God bless you. Your brother in Christ, Always remember this: with God, all things are possible. And remember this also: God loves you. And if you call on Him, He will be there. He will help you, even in the toughest of times. Even when you're tempted to think it's impossible, God will step into your life and change things. God bless you. I'm Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us.